Uncle Creepy tells your tales.
It was October in Wisconsin, but I was still able to get away without wearing a sweater. The warm sun hung brightly in the sky as I drove through the country road that led to my childhood home. The reds, yellows and oranges in the trees always put me in a good mood. Fall had always been my favourite time of year, but given the circumstances, that might change. As the leaves changed and withered away, so did my father. Cancer had taken a toll on him these past couple of years, and I don't think he has many more left. If it's one thing my mother taught me, it was that time is precious and should be spent with the ones you care for the most. I knew that my time belonged to my father now, and thus begins my story. When I arrived, I couldn't help the overwhelming feelings of childhood. Our home is a beautiful country house that has 2 large trees on either side of the front walkway. My old tyre swing still hung proudly, though faded and cracked from time and weather. One thing I couldn't help but to notice was our next door neighbour's yard. Our home was in the country, so the houses were decently spaced apart. But even from my driveway, I could still tell that the Harrisons' house had changed. When I lived at home, they were always outside doing yard work or sitting on their porch. Now their grass was overgrown and old wood piles sat around in their yard. The garage where Mr. Harrison would work seemed dead and lifeless as vines took over the side of it. Mrs. Harrison would have almost every window in the house open while she baked and did household things. Now the windows were shut and the blinds were closed. It even looked like the attic window had been broken and the shrubs out front were withered and neglected. It was all just an unfortunate sight, really. I'm 25 now, and even though the sight was sad, I still understood that things change and to accept it for what it is. When I went inside to greet my father, he was sitting up in his bed. He looked brittle and weak, but overall excited to see me. I smiled and hugged him tight. It had been about a year since I had seen him, and even though he was ill, I couldn't be happier. We talked about his treatment and what I'm learning in my college courses. I made dinner and we nibbled whilst talking some more. The time came when he had to take his medicine and became very drowsy a half an hour after. I pulled his covers up to his chin and kissed him on the forehead, an action that he and Mum did to me when I was a little girl. I smiled and relocated into the living room where I could watch TV and not worry about waking him. I turned on Netflix and started scrolling through the choices. I never really had time to sit and watch movies with school and work, so I figured this would be a wonderful time to relax and get involved. That was until I noticed something move past the window. The curtains weren't open all the way, but just enough to get a decent view of outside. Whatever it was fast, but I didn't think anything of it. It could have been an animal of some sort. There are woods not too far from my house, and I remember catching deer eaten out of my mum's garden all of the time. Then I noticed it dart by again, and then another time after that. This time I wanted to see what the critter was up to, and if it was destroying anything on the porch. I set the remote control down and stood up with a stretch before moseying over to the window and slowly opening the curtains. I didn't want to spook whatever it was, so I carefully leaned in to inspect the porch and saw nothing. No deer, no raccoon, not even a squirrel. I was just about to sit back down when there was a loud bang. It came from the distant hallway, and it made me jump right out of my skin. "Daddy?" I questioned with obvious panic in my voice. The banging continued, and held a constant rhythmic bang, bang, I hurried down the hallway and slowly stepped into my father's room. My eyes fell upon his bed, which he no longer occupied. The banging had seemed to stop, but I was truly confused and scared as to what I might find. "Daddy?" I opened the door all the way and switched on the light. There, by the wide-open window, stood my father. "Dad, what are you doing? You're going to catch a cold." I moved over to him and placed my hands on his shoulders. "Come on, Daddy, back to—" I gasped as his face met mine. His eyes were rolled in the back of his head, and his bottom lip was quivering. I'm not sure how to explain it, but generally I believe it was a seizure. Eventually, he snapped out of it, and I took him back to bed. I stayed with him all night and didn't sleep at all. Once 6 a.m. rolled around, I called his doctor at once to tell him what had happened. He agreed to stop over later today and check up on him. I felt relieved, but also sad. Was this a sign that his condition was getting worse? "You said he was standing at the window whilst going through the seizure-like phase," Dr. Boris asked while looking into my father's eyes with a small flashlight. I stood in the doorway and nodded. "Yes, right over there. He even opened the window and everything." My father waved his hands about and shook his head. "I feel fine. As fine as an old-timer with an illness can anyways," he joked. Both Dr. Boris and I giving him a look that said, "It's not funny, old man." Dr. Boris rubbed his chin. "His vitals are actually pretty good, and I don't see anything to really be alarmed about. It sounds a lot like sleepwalking. That in itself is a different kind of danger, though, especially if you said that he opened a window. It means he physically gets into things. I'm going to write him a prescription for a strong sleep aid. It should keep him out for the entire night. That way, you can get some worry-free sleep as well." And with that, Dr. Boris was on his way, and my dad was back to cracking jokes and eating candy he had stored under his pillow. I sighed as I brought him his dinner, shaking my head at all of the candy wrappers. "You really do have a problem, Dad." He just smiled. "I have a sweet tooth." "Why do you think I chose to shack up with your mother, huh?" "She was my sweet thing." He grinned and did some weird eyebrow thing. "Oh, Dad, really? Shack up? Oh!" He laughed out loud at my disgusted reaction, and I couldn't help but smile. To hear him laugh through his pain and sickness was a wonderful thing to experience. Listen up, Lizzie. One day you'll have a child to gross out, and you'll understand just how fun it is. That night went similarly to the last. We talked about how much we missed my late mother, and how bad Grandma and Grandpa were at anything that had to do with modern technology. We ate our grilled cheese and soup whilst watching TV, and eventually it was time for my father to take his medication and head to bed. Once I knew my father was sleeping soundly, I pampered myself with a steaming hot shower. And after I was done, I wrapped a towel around me and dug inside of my suitcase for my robe. "No way," I said sadly as I rummaged through my things. I could have sworn that I stuck my robe inside of my suitcase, but there is a chance that I left it on my kitchen table whilst rushing to get things together. I sighed, accepting the fact that I left my symbolic article of relaxation 2 hours away, and there was no way in hell I was leaving to get it. I sucked it up like the adult I am, and settled for pyjama pants and a light t-shirt. I was just about to leave the bathroom when the sound of a door slamming made me nearly choke on my own inhale. What the hell? I rushed outside of the bathroom, which was located at the end of the hallway across from my old room. "Dad?" I walked to his room and peeked in. He was the same as when I left him, sleeping soundly and even snoring a bit. I moved slowly and quietly down the hallway and inspected each door. Bathroom door, open. My room, open. Dad's room, open. Computer room, open. So what could have slammed? It was beginning to hurt my brain. I opened and closed cabinets to try and reenact the slam, but I had no such luck. Sighing, I gave up and sat down on the couch. I had started a movie and, little by little, I became more and more tired. I sprawled out on the couch and propped my head up with one of the decorative pillows. 15 minutes later, I was fast asleep. I awoke an hour or so later to end credits rolling up the screen and a cold shiver on my body. I began to sit up when I noticed it. I swallowed hard and rubbed my eyes a bit before looking once again at the front door that was wide open. "Dad!" I hopped off the couch as fast as I could and ran outside to look around. "Dad? Daddy!" I ran down the porch's step in my bare feet with little concern about anything but finding him. I turned around to the front door now closed. Quickly, I ran back to the door and attempted to open it. Locked. "Dad! Dad! Let me in!" I screamed. I began pounding on the door with frustration of unsureness. What the hell was going on? My thoughts were interrupted by the sound of a small bell chiming somewhat nearby. I turned my head to the right and noticed that someone was standing in the distance with a bell in hand. "Hey! Do you have a phone I can borrow? My father, he's ill and I had begun to walk over, but stopped suddenly as I realised that whoever it was had a mask on. A plain white mask with a black robe. My robe. "How did you get that?" I was fuming with anger. It was probably some punk kid trying to rebel or prove a point. "You think it's funny to break into someone's home and steal their belongings?" The figure said nothing. They just rang the bell once more, turned and darted away. "Hey! I'm talking to you!" Without thinking, I ran after them. They were already so far ahead, but I didn't care. This whole time it was probably this person who had opened the door and made me have false concern for my dad. I began to pant as my legs started to slow down. The figure had outrun me, and I needed to catch my breath. "Fine!" I yelled between breaths. "Keep the damn thing! Karma's gonna bite you in the ass anyway." I screamed, and I started to head home. I looked back a few times and then noticed something odd. The house, my neighbour's house, the one that seemed so dull and abandoned, had candles lit in each window and still no lights on. That's odd. I would have thought for sure no one lived there. I had had enough for one night, and I didn't want to deal with any more. I walked alongside of my house but stopped dead in my tracks when I got to my father's window. My heart sunk into my stomach and all thoughts, words and actions were frozen. 6 hooded black figures stood around my father's bed as he slept. They seemed to be chanting something that I couldn't make out. A different language maybe, I'm not sure. It looked like some sort of cult bullshit that you see on TV or hear about in the news. They held hands and continued with their ritual, whatever that was. I was thinking of ways I could get my father out of there. I didn't have a phone, I was locked out, and it wasn't like I could take on all of them. I was shaking. My legs could barely keep me up. I noticed my father's fingers starting to move, which made me hold my breath momentarily. "Ah!" I covered my ears as my father screamed at the top of his lungs. His body began convulsing violently, and the figures kept chanting. "Don't! Please!" I whispered under my breath. My father continued to convulse and scream in what seemed like was pain. Finally, with all of my courage summoned up in one single word, I let loose, "Stop!" My father's body went still immediately, and the fingers all turned their heads to the window at once. They said nothing, but dispersed in their own directions. Some left through his door, and others were coming close to the window. I didn't wait to see what was going to happen. I ran. I didn't look behind me. I just kept running until I entered the wooded area by our house. In the moonlight, I saw the masked figure, and once again it rang the bell. "What are you doing?" They didn't speak a single word, but instead pointed to a path and rang the bell again. I didn't have time to question, and even if listening to this being was the wrong choice, so be it. I ran on the path I was directed to and eventually came across a large tree with an opening. I looked around before dropping to my knees and climbing inside, and I curled into a ball and began to sob. But I stopped myself immediately out of fear that someone would hear me. I sat in the tree until the first signs of day. Cautiously, I began to crawl out of the innards of the tree and began to head home. Once I was out of the woods, the caution I once had was minimal, as I began to run back to my house. Is Dad okay? Will he still be there when I return? I couldn't help but ask these questions on my return home. Dad! I was prepared to smash the door down if I had to, but to my surprise it opened right away. Daddy? I ran inside and barged into his room, which made him jump up with a confused face. Lizzie? Where have you been, sweetheart? And why are you covered in dirt? You're a mess, Liz. Wash up before we eat. I was taken back by how normal he was acting, but I threw my arms around him and started sobbing. He tried to comfort me, but I was hysterical. And once I finally calmed down, I explained to him the story. He knew I wasn't a liar, but he was also a non-believer in anything abnormal or paranormal. He seemed to be stuck between a rock and a hard place and where to place his belief of what happened. I begged him to move. I told him that I wouldn't go back to school if it meant me leaving him here in this house. He was reluctant for weeks, but finally gave in. I helped him find a place closer to the city where I could keep an eye on him. A month after moving, his appetite came back, and he was able to get rid of the sleep aid once prescribed to him. My dad continued with chemo, and eventually, after 5 months, he was nearly cancer-free. I was so proud of my dad, and the fact that I got to see him every weekend was the highlight of my Fridays. One night, after I returned to my dorm, my roommate poked her head in before heading out and told me a package arrived for me. I smiled and nodded as she handed it to me. Thank you, Anne. And with that she was gone. I hopped on my bed and began to open the brown box with no address on it. I gasped as I looked at the contents. A note, a bell, and my black robe. I opened the note immediately. It read, "Time is a precious thing. Spend it wisely and with the people you love." Something my mother always used to say to me. I still have so many questions that will probably never be answered. Was it the house that was making my father sick? The people in the black robes? Was my mother the one that helped me, or someone she may have known? I sighed and slipped my shoes on and began to head out of the dorms for the night. As I was locking the door, I could have sworn that I heard the faintest sound of a bell chiming. I smiled slightly and then carried on my way. Hiya guys, it's Creepy again here, and I hope you've enjoyed the second instalment of Uncle Creepy Tells You Tales. A couple of quick thank yous before I go. First up, obviously, to Kitty Korleski again for writing such a wonderful story and allowing me to narrate for her, and I know for a fact that Kitty really is going to go a long way. She's also thinking about starting up her own channel, which I really hope that she does, and if she does, I will be giving you links to it so that we can all support her and help her channel to grow. I also want to give a big shout out to Jodie McAlpine, who did the voice work at the start of the show. Big thank you to you, Jodie. And last of all, I also want to mention that over the weekend there's going to be 2 more stories coming out. The first one is by Krista Mason. It's a very spooky tale called The Wanderer, and the second one that's going to be coming out is by Charlie Waters, and that is called The Pumpkin Gremlin. And that is a very unique story, and I promise it's going to give you plenty of scares. So this is your Uncle Creepy checking out here. saying good night and I'll see you soon.